Good morning.
Morning, everybody. All right, so it is actually just turning 10 o'clock. Um, I am delighted to welcome you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would just take a minute and put in the chat box your name and where you're from. We want to get a flavor of, do we have people from across the US? Do we have anybody international? That would be great. I'm seeing Mexico. All right. We do have people from other places. So please put your name in the chat box, where you're from. Minnesota, Mexico, Santa Fe, Greensboro, North Carolina, Denver, Indianapolis, Cleveland, Massachusetts, Canada, Wyoming, Riverton, Wyoming. Spent a lot of time there.
So
Oh my
Germany,
goodness, Germany, Littleton, Southern Colorado. Well, thank you all for joining. We greatly appreciate your spending time with us. I am looking at some of the squares, the little boxes, and I'm seeing that there are people that I recognize. Hey, Lupe, how are you? Barbara, how are you? Barbara Brooks, Barbara Richardson,
Mm.
um, Tom Muddle, a whole team of people that are connected to in some way, shape, or form the Encore Network, and many of you that I'm not familiar with. So I appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. My name is Karen Brown, and I am joined by Chip Conley, uh, who will be co-hosting this event with us. And if you could, please be sure to mute yourself.
That's
Yeah, if you could mute yourself, whoever that might be, that would really be appreciated. Uh, or if there's anybody from our team on who could take a look and mute them, that would be great. But Karen Brown and Jim McGinley, co-hosting and also the co-chairs of the program committee for the Encore Network. And for those of you who don't know of the Encore Network, we are a coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 plus by creating community, stimulating learning, and inspiring action to transform the Encore stage of life. So a couple of quick announcements today. As you know, when you signed up for this, we told you that 25 people who actually registered and attended the event today will receive a free copy of Chip's book. What we'll do is at the end of the day, we'll pull off that register of who actually was here today. We'll put them into a hat and draw out names. And then tomorrow, Kelly and I will get in touch with you to let you know how we'll get your book shipped off to you. And the other thing I want to talk about, thank you, Kelly, she is ahead of the curve here, is that we are doing a membership drive. This is like our first major membership drive since we were formed maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. It is a wonderful opportunity. I first learned of the term BOGO. I mean, how many of you have heard that term, BOGO, B-O-G-O? Like, I remember saying to Lupe, what is that? And she said, Karen, it's a buy one, get one free. So you have an opportunity right now to purchase a membership for yourself to the Encore Network and gift a membership to somebody that you know who's connected in this space, an organization that might do coaching for this population, academia who's tied in with really helping people through the midlife. And along with that, the first 75 people will also receive a copy of Chip's book. And that book title is Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Things That Get Better with Age. So do take a look at that. And I think Kelly's going to put in the link, in the chat box, a link to our website so that you can actually look more closely at this membership drive. And we would really encourage you to join. So the agenda today, Jim and I are going to do most of the questions. We'll do a little bit of Q&A. I'll start the program. Jim will follow up in the latter half of the segment. We will open up to questions at least the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes of the program. So as we go along, if you could put your comments, put your questions in the chat box, we'll be watching for those and be certain to introduce those. We do want to be sure, please keep yourself muted during the whole event. It is really distracting to hear TVs and other spouses or peers talking to you on the event, and it's just respectful to everybody else. So we will record the event, and after the event, and this will actually be early next week, we'll send a link to the event and links to lots of different things, like our membership drive, upcoming events, where to get Chip's book, more about the Modern Elder Academy. So that basically touches on all the basics. Our topic today is midlife And Chip, I always like to say midlife and beyond. We'll be having this discussion with the Chip Conley, co-founder of the Modern Elder Academy and New York Times bestselling author with a new book out. Again, I'm going to say it again, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. And as we all know with PR, you have to hear something 7 times. So Chip, I'm going to be mentioning this title 7 different times during our presentation. So a little background about Chip. Chip was an American boutique hotelier for several decades. He owned and ran Joy de Vivre hotels until just before his 50th birthday, the ultimate in midlife. He pivoted from running his own shop after the 3 young founders of Airbnb approached him to help their small tech startup democratize hospitality. Chip spent the 7 years mentoring the CEO with his curiosity and his wisdom and helped them steer the company. He earned that modern elder term title in the company, which led him to create the Modern Elder Academy. This is the world's first midlife wisdom school with locations in Baja, Mexico, and now Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well-known author, of which his 2 most recent books really apply directly to the encore phase of life. I would add, I have not been to Baja, I have not been to Santa Fe, but I have participated in every online class, and I can say those were wonderful opportunities to be involved. So Chip, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Karen and Jim, thank you. It's an honor to be with you. I love the Encore Network, so I'm really honored to be here.
Well, I want to start out with a couple of different things. After having read the book, it's clear to me that you've drawn on your own personal experiences and through some really challenging midlife times. But I'm really curious about how your work with the Modern Elder Academy, you've had more than 4,000 people attend that academy. How did that help you populate this book? How did it inform and influence the writing of this book?
Well, thanks for giving a little bit of my bio. When I had in my late 40s, I had a really rough period, which ultimately led me to selling my boutique hotel company. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I'd never heard of something called the U curve of happiness. For those of you who know it or you don't know it, it basically says that it shows, based upon research globally, that people's life satisfaction declines pretty consistently between their early 20s and bottoms out around 45 to 50. And then with each decade after that, starting in your 50s, you get happier. So 50s happier than 40s, 60s happier than 50s, 70s happier than 60s, and women in their 80s happier than 70s. I didn't know anything about that. All I knew was I was going through a very difficult time between 45 and 50. And I ended up using that opportunity to sort of say, okay, I want to understand midlife more, because I also lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52. During that time, it was between 2008 and 2010. I went into my 50s and I had my favorite decade of, my life up to that point. And I was like, wow, this is weird. Midlife is both the worst of times and the best of times. But all midlife, there's not been a lot of research on midlife. And the brand of midlife is defined by one word. You can put it in the chat. What is the one word? It starts with a C. Let's see if someone gets it. Go. Crisis. Let's just call it a spade a spade. Yeah. I have come to realize, Karen, thank you for saying that we've had over 4,000 people go through the MEA program from 47 countries who have come down to our Baja campus in Mexico. What I've learned from them is that maybe midlife's not a crisis, it's a chrysalis. So if you think back to the caterpillar to butterfly journey, the midlife for the butterfly is the chrysalis. And it's when it's dark and gooey and solitary, but it's also where the transformation happens. And so in the process of writing this book, I really started with that as my premise, which is, what if midlife is not a crisis, but it's a chrysalis? And society is pretty good at reminding us, as is Hallmark cards, reminding us what gets worse with age. But I really wanted to explore the subtitle of this book, The 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, and use both the 4,000 plus alums in our community, my own personal experience, but also a lot of social science research to back up those 12 reasons why life gets better with age. And finally, I'll say one last thing. Midlife to me is a state of mind, not necessarily an age. Yes, some sociologists now say midlife lasts from 35 to 75, which is a long marathon. And if you're living to 100, that makes sense for sure. But I think the best way to describe midlife
Really?
is it's the era of your life. It's the bridge between early adulthood and later adulthood. And the longer we're living, the longer that bridge. And I can go into more depth on that a little bit later, but thank you for the question.
The next question, for those, some of the people who have read the book will know that he has it segued into 5 different areas. So we've got the physical life, the emotional life, the mental life, the vocational life, and the spiritual life. And I thought, when Chip, Kelly, Jim, and I talked beforehand, we met a little bit before this to kind of prepare, we were all talking about, oh my gosh, so much of what society focuses on is the physical life. Yet in your book, 80% of this book really doesn't deal with the physical. So share with us why is this book not talking about, hey, what do I look like when I'm, 65?
Well, unfortunately, and it's more true in the United States than just about anywhere else, we sort of look at our life as defined by the physical plane, how we look, how, our physical stature. And I like to think of our body as being something that was issued to us as a rental vehicle at childhood, or not just childhood, at birth. And, as you have more mileage on your vehicle, there's occasional dings and the paint's chipping a little bit. And maybe hopefully over time, you don't care quite as much what it looks like on the outside, but you care more about what that rental vehicle feels like on the inside. And so what I really wanted to do was I wanted to help people to see that, yeah, our physical body and our beauty and our brawn, it generally gets worse with age. I love seeing YouTube videos of 75-year-old marathoners or 85-year-old yoga enthusiasts. It's great. And yet there are more playing fields in life than just the physical body. That there's our emotions, there's our mind, and I'll talk about the mind in a minute. There's our relationships, there's our spiritual curiosity. There's all these other planes in which, frankly, many things get better with age. And so what I really wanted to do is give some attention to those things because we live in a very ageist culture and we have all kinds of anti-aging creams and products and services. And generally those are anti-women products, let's be honest, because they're meant to make women feel badly about their aging. And so I really wanted to focus on the pro-aging message because Becca Levy at Yale has shown the following. If you can actually if you can shift your mindset from a negative to a positive around the topic of aging, if your mindset shifts from negative to positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional life, all else being equal. And that's more additional life than just about anything else. It's more life than if you stop smoking at 50 or start exercising at 50. So long story short is I really wanted to create a message that helped people to see that there's a lot of things that get better with age. Last thing on the mind, yes, our short-term memory is not as good as we get older. And we've seen that recently with our presidential candidates. But what's really interesting is that as Arthur Brooks, who's a friend of MEA and a teacher, one of our online faculty members, he's a Harvard professor who wrote a book called From Strength to Strength. He was able to show in the research that when we move from fluid intelligence when we're young, which is we're fast and focused, as we get older, what gets better is what's called crystallized intelligence. And it's our ability to connect the dots, think systemically and holistically. And it's partly because, as Dr. Gene Cohen wrote about in his book, The Aging Brain, we do 4-wheel drive of the brain. We're able to go from left brain to right brain more adeptly. So a lot of us think, oh my gosh, my brain's getting worse with age. Yes, in some ways it is. It's actually shrinking as well, which is part of the reason you can go easily from the left brain to the right brain. But there's so many things that get better with age, including things about our mind, up until it peaks in our early 70s, this idea of crystallized intelligence and the ability to think systemically and holistically. So yeah, so that's just one of many things that gets better with age.
Chip, I see that Karen has dropped off, so I'll pick it up until she rejoins us.
Okay. I
Uh,
won't I won't take it personally.
I thought your answer was pretty good, really, so I'll keep going with
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Actually, I want to pick up a little bit further on those four aspects that Karen pointed out from your book. And can you expand a little bit more about the spiritual life that you talk about in your book, and perhaps uh, make your comments relevant for those who perhaps think spiritually and perhaps don't. And you also mentioned Richard Rohr, and it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about the influence he's had on you and your book.
So for those who don't know Richard's he's been called a Christian mystic. He's a Catholic priest who's written maybe 40 or 50 books at this point. Maybe maybe the most read modern day religious leader. So he's based here in New Mexico, where I am. He's in Albuquerque. He came to MEA in Baja at age 78 as a student. He
Mhm.
wanted to learn from a woman named Lynn Twist, who wrote a book called The Soul of Money, who was leading a workshop for us. And I had gotten to know Richard before that, but I got to know him a lot better down on campus in Baja. And now he's teaching for us here in July at our Santa Fe campus. And what Richard said, he said, I think his book, Falling Upward, if you were to read one of his books, I think this is the one that's maybe the most relevant to your question. Falling Upward, I think the subtitle is a spirituality for the second half of life, or something like that. What he believes is that, and Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, sort of said the same thing. During the first half of our life, our primary operating system of how we see the world and how we show up in the world is our ego, the operating system that sort of defines how we show up in the world. And it helps individuate us, helps us to feel like we know who we are. It helps propel us forward. And then at some point, maybe the ego gets in our way a little bit, and we realize, you know what, it's not working for us anymore. And it's usually around midlife that starts to become more apparent to some people. And what Richard Rohr and Carl Jung both say is that in the second half of our life, the primary operating system is the soul. And yet nobody gives you any operating instructions or warning that this is coming. But at MEA, what we see is the average age of the people who come to MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, is 54. We've had people as young as 25 and as old as 88. And what I see over and over again is people getting curious in their, let's say, mid 50s or anywhere from 40 to 70, starting to get curious about things that they hadn't given attention to in the past, whether it's, the meaning of life, the purpose of their own life, spirituality, maybe a newfound interest in religion. We had a guy named Phil Pizzo who used to run Stanford Medical School, and is on our online faculty as well. And at age 77, a good Catholic boy who had run Stanford Medical School, he grew up in a Catholic family. All of a sudden at 77, he said, listen, I want to become a rabbi. And he left Stanford and decided to become a rabbi. And what he said, and I actually write about him, in the book, Learning to Love Midlife. What he said to me was like, he needed later in life to think of his life as not just growing old, but growing whole. And he'd been a very intellectually, inclined person. And while he was a good practicing Catholic, he had these dreams about Judaism. And he had this curiosity about Judaism. And at some point in his mid 70s, he had to actually wake up to this and just say, like, I think I'm supposed to go to rabbinical school. And that's what he did. And that's not an unusual case, because there are a lot of people who, in their 50s and beyond, get more curious about the way the world works and how we can influence and impact the world. And that for many, it means that they become an activist. For a lot of people, it's becoming an aging activist. I have been recently called a midlife activist, and I will own that. That's a good one. I like, I don't think there are, to be honest with you, there aren't a whole lot of midlife activists out there. No, it's the disavowed brand of a life stage that most people don't connect with. So I think all of this is good because to actually move out of the ghetto of your ego into a place where you feel connected with something bigger than yourself. I mean, that's a great prelude to the later part of your life when you really do learn how to feel connected to something bigger than yourself.
So Jim, I am back. Oh, this is pretty amazing. I can't believe it conked out on me. Actually, Chip, I thought it was your internet that was going out. I thought, oh, we're losing Chip, but it was you were losing me. But I thank you so much for filling in, Jim. I did want to step back. I think the host just muted me. So actually, I'm back on. Is the whole concept of the emotional, mental, vocational, and spiritual life. We actually have a poll. I think Kelly, if you could launch the poll, we wanted to get a flavor from each of the people here. You know, again, Chip separated his book into 5 categories. And we've dropped physical life. We all recognize physical is there. But what we want to get is a flavor for, of those 4 non-physical, that mental, the emotional, the vocational, the spiritual, which is really most important to you right now in your life. And as we're getting this filled out, Chip, I want to ask you at the Modern Elder Academy, do you think that these different categories vary as a function of age? Do you think that there's part of my thinking was, you know what, maybe as I get older, spiritual becomes that much more important to me?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. The 5 go in the book in the order of physical, emotional, mental, vocational, and spiritual. I do think spiritual is something that gets certainly amplified with age. I think vocational is interesting because often, oh, I see Ashton is here. Hi, Ashton. It's great to see you, or see your name. And Ashton will be teaching at MEA in Baja later this year. So I think that the physical one is the one that we're supposed to actually let go of. It doesn't mean that we don't keep our rental vehicle maintained, but if we can get over the idea that short-term vanity is why we actually take care of our body, as opposed to, in fact, moving to long-term maintenance. That's why physical is important. The emotional is really important, partly because as Bob Waldniger at Harvard has shown, and so has Blue Zones, that the number one variable for living a longer, healthy, happy life is how connected you are socially. I like to use the term social wellness, because social wellness is the opposite of loneliness. It's helping people to feel a deep sense of connection with each other. It's part of what we try to do at MEA. And then the mental piece is like, as I said earlier, there's some parts of our mental life that get better with age. Our wisdom is one of them. You know, as we get older, we are able to cultivate our wisdom. And then the 4th one is vocational, which people get like, well, what's vocational? Well, you start to learn how to get off the treadmill and instead focus on your calling and maybe something more that, you know, is meaningful to you. And then finally, the spiritual. So let's see what the results are. I'll let Deborah or Karen, I'll let you talk us through the results.
So I'm assuming I can see them. Can everybody else see them as well?
Yes.
Okay, great. So actually pretty amazing. Emotional, 60%. That I assumed it would be vocational. I'm really excited to see it's emotional. Mental is 41%, vocational is 31%, and spiritual is 34%. I really assumed that vocational would probably be a little bit higher. This is interesting. And Chip, as you think about MEA, does this dovetail nicely with what you see and as people come in?
Well, what I would say if I were to like look at each of these 4, and again, let's remember that the physical is not listed here.
Right.
Is that there's a guy named Dacher Keltner who is a UC Berkeley professor and started the Greater Good Science Center. He said that, you know, he wrote a book called Awe, AWE, that came out a year ago, and he showed the 8 most common pathways to feeling awe in life. And of course, you would think nature would be number 1, but it was number 3. What he said was that at MEA, we do 2 things really well. We do number 1 and number 2 well. Number 2 is collective effervescence. So what does that mean? Collective effervescence. It relates sort of the emotional life piece of this. It's when your sense of ego separation dissolves and your sense of communal joy arises. And it's often when you could be at a sporting event, an arts event, a political speech, or in our case, with maybe 24 people in a workshop, the sense that you have just fallen in love with a collection of people and gotten to know them from the inside out. So collective effervescence is a beautiful phrase. It comes from Emile Durkheim, a French sociologist who studied religious pilgrimages. And then the first thing on his list was moral beauty. And so that's the number one way people feel a sense of awe in life. Now, it's hard to believe this in the very polarized world we live in, but moral beauty is when you're an enlightened witness for courage, resilience, compassion, equanimity, kindness. And by seeing it, you feel, like your sense of humanity is restored. And so I think that both of those, which I think both relate to the emotional life, are two of the things that I see more than anything at MEA. I also see a lot of people in midlife or later midlife, maybe in there, because I think there's 3 stages to midlife. Let me say that first. Midlife goes from 35 to 50. That's early midlife. 50 to 60 would be the core of midlife. And 60 to 75 would be later midlife. And what I see a lot for people in the core of midlife, 50 and on, and maybe later midlife, is a desire to become a beginner again, over and over again. And that's a little bit on the vocational life. Getting yourself off the treadmill, creating some time affluence, and then learning how to become a beginner again. And one of the questions we really love asking at MEA is, what is it that you know now or have learned now that you wish you'd known or learned 10 years ago? Think about that for a minute. What is it that you know now or have learned now that you wish you'd known or learned 10 years ago? And then here's the more important question. 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? And I'm 63 now, but at age 57, I learned how to surf because I was living in Mexico near a surf break. I started learning Spanish. But both of those things were hard from a mindset for me because, I'm too old at 57 to learn how to surf. I'm too old to learn a foreign language. But when I put it in the question of what will I regret 10 years from now if I don't learn it or do it now, living part-time on a beach in Mexico made me feel like, gosh, at 67, it'll be harder than at 57. So I better learn this now. Anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. When you can sort of imagine the thing you're going to regret, and therefore it catalyzes you into action now, that's not a bad thing. And especially in midlife, and midlife and later, when we may have some more time on our hands.
Well, thank you. The time is going way too quickly. So I'm going to jump to a question that has another pull tied to it. In the book, you mentioned a variety of different terms. So midlife, midolescence, and I think 2 you coined yourself. Midlife, how do you say it? Chrysalis? Chrysalis, and age fluid. So I would like for you to share with us a little bit more about those terms, and especially age fluid, because I think that's your more recent term.
Yeah. So just to be clear, midlife chrysalis is a term that I created based upon midlife crisis. I was like, what if midlife is really an opportunity for a time for transformation, but it might actually you might go through a little bit of a challenging time. Midolescence is a word that existed, but I've been trying to popularize it a little bit. It's the adult form of adolescence, the corollary when you're going through hormonal, emotional, physical, and identity transitions. But we give people a lot of support. You give young people a lot of support in adolescence, and you're going through adolescence with a peer group where you're having firsts in your life. But people going through midolescence don't have a support group often, and they don't know the roadmap that they're going through. And they think sometimes they're getting the game of life wrong. The idea of age fluid came to me when I was on stage at one point when I was talking about the fact that I don't like the term ageless. Ashton will appreciate this. Ageless suggests that there's something wrong with age. Because if you have less of age, you look so ageless. Well, I think that's bunk. I mean, I think what we really want to help people to be is age fluid, such that you can be older or younger than your chronological age. You can be all the ages you've ever been, and you're not defined by maybe even your generation, which are constructs, social constructs. And instead you have this fluidity of being, today I feel like I'm 35 and tomorrow I feel like I'm 65, and depending upon the context. Now, you don't necessarily want a 16-year-old to say that they're age fluid and they're drinking. That's a whole different story. Uh, but for adults, I think there's something to this. And what was the other term you had there, you suggested?
Well, before you go into those other terms, Kelly, can you launch the poll? Because we want to get a perspective from the audience, of these four terms.
Oh, yeah. And
what's the perspective of the people here? Which one do you think should go mainstream in 2024?
well, let me say the last one there, Karen. Pro-aging is the last one. I gave a TED talk last year on the big stage, and when I said pro-aging, like, we need more pro-aging products and services, because I talked about Becca Levy's research that's showing that pro-aging helps people live longer. People went wild over that one, but I like all four of these. I'm gonna vote for one here, but I like all four.
And actually, we're going to get a few seconds. Well, actually, for the first time yesterday, I was on a call with Barbara Brooks, Second Act Women, and in her title on LinkedIn, she's a pro-ager. I mean, it's like, oh my goodness, that was the first time I'd seen that term. So it is gaining in popularity. Like, we've got maybe another 10 seconds. We're seeing a pretty good response for pro-aging, but age fluid is coming in pretty nicely. And actually, in the book, you do a great job of describing that a little bit better. After I read the definition, it was sort of like, yeah, I do like that. I like that.
Of age fluid?
Of age fluid.
Yeah.
I like fluid. It's fluid. It's, go back and
Yeah,
forth.
we're also familiar with gender fluid, which is a term that's gotten a lot of attention. So let me give you age fluid. I'm gonna give you my actual definition as we get your poll results up.
Okay.
Here's the actual definition that I would propose. Denoting or relating to a person who does not identify themselves as having a fixed age or being part of a specific generation. Someone age fluid might have been called ageless in the past. However, that definition, never looking old or appearing to grow old, doesn't fit this context. Today's age fluid individual is perfectly content to be both younger and older than their chronological age. They look at ages or stages of life as identities or costumes that they can don or shed. So look at this. Well, yeah, it's age fluid and pro-aging have,
Those are the two. Good to know. So could be, maybe we'll see them both very active in 2024. Well, we are already at 10:32, and I am going to turn it over to Jim McGinley. He's going to actually ask a few more questions, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A from the audience. So people, I will start scanning the chat for questions. Jim.
Jim, you're on mute.
I was doing so well, but here we go. This is a question that's related to one that's in the chat. Encore Network hosted last fall at one of our programs, Susan Wilner Golden, author of Stage Not Age. You familiar with her and her book?
Yeah, I've had a meal with her, so yes.
And one of her main points is that categorizing people into buckets, for example, from Gen Z to silent generation, is somewhat misguided. People 40 to 80 can experience the same stage. How does that thought relate to your thinking about the midlife world?
Well, I think one of the challenges we sometimes look at is we look at the younger generation and say, oh my God, look at how narcissistic they are. Look at how, job hopping they are, etc. And the truth is that with age, we were probably the same way back then. And so there are some qualities of how we are that are sort of age related. And then there's some qualities that are really not specific to a demographic. They're more specific to a psychographic. And Susan and I've talked about this. So what I mean by a psychographic is maybe the 5 adjectives that would define you, or the way you show up in the world and see the world politically and socially. And that, when you're talking about people connecting with each other psychographically, there's little to do with age. So for example, you might be someone who, Bill McKibben has his third act group that is focused on planet, what we can do as older people to help the planet. The beautiful thing about that group is they're connecting with younger people who are going to be on this planet longer than we are, who are even more worried than we are about what's going on because they're bringing kids onto the planet, and they're worried about how their kids are going to be affected. So I think that there's some things politically, socially, psychologically that have very little to do with age. At the same time, I do think there are rites of passage that do happen that are age specific. Menopause happens during a certain time in a woman's life. Becoming an empty nester tends to happen during a certain time in your life. Sandwich generation, taking care of your aging parents, taking care of your kids, happens during a certain time of life. And so I'm going to answer by saying yes and yes. There are certain things in life where there's a core group of people you're going to connect with because it's a bit of a rite of passage at that time of life. And then there's other subjects that are going to be, age diverse and age fluid in terms of who's going to be interested in it.
Good.
Say one last thing, Jim. We have done some intergenerational workshops at MEA, and I just love them. When you have 4 or 5 generations in a workshop together, focusing on societal issues. And we did create something called Generations Over Dinner. And again, don't love the term generations on that one, but it's what we used. Generations Over Dinner is a free service. You can go to generationsoverdinner.com, and there's some curated questions around certain topics that would help people to actually go deeper on that topic with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 generations at the dinner table together. We've had 7 generations in Tel Aviv, in Sydney, Australia, in Denver, Colorado. And it's a great free way to connect with a collection of people and have deep, life-changing conversations with people who are of different ages.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. And just a quick endorsement of what you just said about Generations Over Dinner. We're certainly very familiar with it at the Encore Network and have had good experience with it ourselves. So thanks for initiating that.
Yep, thank you.
One more question for me. You talked about the process of growing old, but also growing whole. And we aren't just whole individually, but we're part of a larger whole. Sounds like that would describe the Encore Network. Do you think? You agree?
Yeah. Yeah, to grow whole. So we are familiar with the idea of growing old, and it's part of life. So no one should feel badly about it. But I also like the term growing whole for 2 reasons. The first is something I talked about earlier, which is to be part of something bigger than yourself. So you're part of a whole connection with the Encore Network or with your community or with a global community. But on a personal level, I like the idea of growing whole because I have seen it so many times that as people get older, they learn how to alchemize the polarized parts of themselves, the masculine, the feminine, the yin, the yang, the gravitas, the levity, the extrovert, the introvert, the curious and the wise. And they have presence at 75 years old or whatever age, because they have learned how to integrate all of that into one whole. So Eric Erikson, the famous developmental psychologist, talked about that the most important thing later in life is the question of integrity versus despair. And when he used the word integrity, he was not talking about being truthful or having ethics. He meant it in the perspective of learning how to integrate all of what might have been compartmentalized earlier in your life into being a whole human. And if you've ever spent time with someone who is present and older, you sense that they are all of the ages they've ever been. And that's what's beautiful about them. So, and many of you people on this call fit that profile.
Good, thanks. I'll move to the chat. And here's a question that I'll summarize. I want to know what are the possibilities of living that I'm not considering because I've only been exposed to the treadmill, US culture, etc. So she's talking about where she's been. What don't I know about my 60s, 70s, and 80s is what she's questioning.
Well, we live in a culture, and again, this is very US based, but there are other countries in the world that have the same affliction. The word consumerism is 70 years old. And what it really meant, and what was meant to convey, was when a societal perspective is imposed upon you in a way that doesn't feel so good. And consumerism speaks to the idea that, oh, I have to be a consumer, I have to keep up with the Joneses. And Madison Avenue was all about fostering that. So there's a word that I am trying to popularize in the book called successism. It's like a new form it's like consumerism, but applied not so much to what you're buying, but what you're doing and how you're productive. And we live in an era where being productive is like the ultimate, those are our heroes, is the people who are productive and are productive in ways that are conventionally considered successful. And I think this is let me start by saying guilty as charged. I'm ambitious, I'm driven, I have lived a life that for the exterior public looks very successful. And therefore, I am someone who can look at my history and how I was brought up and the community I was brought up in, my parents, my family, my grandparents, and can see like, wow, was I imposed a script on success that I jumped on that treadmill and I ran it. And I think I can look back now and say, it served me well in certain ways, but man, at some point you got to jump off that treadmill because that treadmill will kill you. But also that treadmill will, depress you because you'll realize that you're running on a treadmill. And frankly, when you're running on a treadmill, it's not going anywhere. It's just you're trying yourself out, but you're not getting anywhere. But you're not getting anywhere in terms of what's more important in life. And often getting off of the successism treadmill is learning to get clear on what's important. David Brooks, whether you like him or not, wrote the books The Second Mountain. And he said the first mountain is success and the second mountain is purpose. And, that makes sense, although I don't think they have to be mountains because mountains suggest you're like, trudging up a mountain. Why couldn't it just be a nice some rolling hills or a nice valley with a river? But I think the idea that you move towards purpose is an essential part of any time of life, but especially in midlife. And that's part of the reason that the four basic pillars of MEA's work are navigating transitions, cultivating purpose, helping people to understand their mastery and their wisdom, owning their wisdom, and then finally, how to reframe our relationship with aging. Because those are the things we see people are really searching for often in midlife and beyond.
Thanks. Very helpful. I have a very detailed question here in the chat that I'll try to do justice to. As we age, metaphorically speaking, we build our life, meaning and purpose. But as we have experience, we live with some metaphors where the rubber meets the road, think global, but act local, are central to what some people would call a happiness curve. What do you think about these comments relative to earning and thinking versus doing?
There's so much more I'd want to ask this person who asked this question.
Right.
So I hope that I'm on the right path with this answer. But there's no doubt that our process as we get older is to go from doing to being. And I'm not the first person to say that. But I think there's a real truth to it. And so, yes, where the rubber meets the road is very much the doing piece. And, going out and being productive is the doing piece. But I think, again, back to the idea of spirituality or something, or a curiosity about something bigger than yourself growing with age. this is why taking time to reflect is very important. Mary Catherine Bateson, the Harvard professor whose mother was Margaret Mead and father was Gregory Bateson, came up with the term midlife atrium. And her premise was this, is that we are living longer. Longevity is,
By the
not
way,
so
that
much.
was my question.
What's that? Oh, okay, Tom.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
so longevity, longevity in the US sucks right now. Let's be honest, but on the globe, it's continuing to grow. And so what she said is that we're living longer, but maybe that doesn't mean we're older longer. It just means we're in midlife longer. And what we really need to do in midlife is to create an atrium, because we need a space to reflect upon and have the space to imagine how do you want to consciously curate the second half of your adult life. And so that's another example of saying, how do you create the space to ask bigger and deeper questions of yourself? Who's going to do that with you? I mean, this is what MEA is in the business of doing, whether it's in our online programs or at our campuses. But the truth is, you could do that with friends. You could have a book club and ask them deeper questions in a book that you really enjoy. Karen Walrond is going to be teaching later this year in Santa Fe at our campus. African American woman talks about the Join the Radiant Rebellion. I love that book. And there's this book that just came out by Ben Catt, Katt, about sort of the hero's journey applied to midlife and beyond. It's a very spiritually inclined book. There's lots of great books out there around this age. And having a book club where you can talk about the books is a great way to have some midlife atrium, some space to reflect upon how you want to live your life.
Thank you, Chip. Karen, I'll turn it back to you. Those are the questions in the chat at this stage.
Actually, I saw a couple more, so I'm gonna, since we've got still 14 minutes. One says, as our parents significantly decline, how do we not lose ourselves, but yet find balance in being there for them and being whole for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, and especially for those who are sandwich generation, we're taking care of both the parents and the kids, even if the kids are adults, because that happens more and more. Is they need help in ways maybe that they didn't 50 years ago. To be present for your parent. Both of my parents are 86. To be present for your parents as they are elderly, not an elder, but elderly, those are two different words, is a gift and a pain in the neck. Because they're going through stuff, and this is where I think the U-curve of happiness research gets it wrong. I do think the last 2, 3, 5 years of people's lives, often, especially later in life, often are not happy times. I think Laura Carstenson's work has been fascinating, shows that when the less time you have left in life, the more you focus on the present moment, and therefore the happier you get. I think there's truth to that. And yet, if in that present moment all you're feeling is pain because you actually are, stage 4 cancer, and you're dealing with all kinds of drugs and all kinds of doctors, that's not an easy time. So the most important thing we can do, you don't want to have regret. You don't want to have regret about your parents. You want to be able to love and care for them, but you also need to have support. And so again, I'm talking about, we as a culture in the US aren't very good at creating caregiving support. We're in fact very bad at it. And in fact, when there's the Biden administration tried to create a social infrastructure, part of the Inflation Act, like it was like, oh no, we're just doing physical infrastructure. We're just building things. We're not creating caregiving infrastructure. And that was crazy, because with a growing number of older people, caregiving is becoming such a significant part of people's lives. One of our most popular MEA affinity groups of alumni is the caregiver group. And so and because they want to sort of support each other in terms of, as a support group, they can talk about, here's what I'm going through. What do you suggest? So you don't have to join MEA to do that. You could do that with some friends, but just try to get to a place where you don't feel like you're having to do it by yourself, alone. Because even if you're doing most of the physical work alone, you can get some social support from others.
Good suggestion. But actually, that's how I got into the field of aging. Worked as a geoscientist, environmental science and engineering, became a caregiver. After 10 years of that, I said, oh, energy's got it covered. We need help in the aging space. So here I am. Another question that I see is, how can we get the US to move more effectively embracing midlife and people who are older and deploying them in roles like flex jobs, high impact volunteerism, even continuing in the work world itself? Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'll be brief, but there's 3 life stages that came, it's really sort of appeared in the 20th century. Adolescence as a word didn't exist till 1904. Once it got coined the term, you realize that, oh, you're not an adult when you hit puberty, not till 18. And adolescence got a lot of love and care. Retirement, 1930s, Social Security, pensions, later AARP, retirement communities got a lot of love. Midlife was a function of the fact that we went from 47 as the longevity in the US in the year 1900 to 77 in the year 2000. We added 30 years in 1 century. So midlife became a thing. And the only thing it got was the term the midlife crisis in 1965. So midlife as a life stage has gotten very little attention. And that's part of the reason I wanted to write this book, and make it a mainstream book, not just an academic book. I think Encore and the Encore Fellows program is a very good program to help people, say after 50, who want to give back. So I think helping to popularize the idea of giving back, helping to popularize intergenerational collaboration and mutual mentorship. When I was at Airbnb, I had over 100 mentees. I was older than all of them. Almost all of them are millennials, and I'm a boomer. And I learned as much from them as they did from me. So how are we creating new bridges across the generations, to both solve problems in the world, but also solve problems within organizations? So by next year, 2025, the majority of Americans will have a younger boss. Think about that for a second. We have never seen that before. The majority of Americans will have a younger boss. So learning how to get together and solve problems together across generations is more important than it's ever been.
I have one more question for you. And it says, is Chip saying that statistically, as we get older, we become happier and happier? And then he goes on to say, and if that's the case, if there are people who have become depressed, are they treatable as they age?
Well, I'm not a doctor, but so I will cite data that I know about, and there's no doubt that depression is a challenging thing, as is loneliness. And as Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, has shown, like, loneliness is toxic. It has a huge impact on people's health conditions. So I think that number one is, how do we help people feel that sense of social wellness, that sense of connection with others? To me, that's one of the number one reasons why someone at an older age is feeling badly about their life, is because they don't have that social connection, that social wellness that I mentioned earlier. And I talk about that in the book. In terms of the U-curve of happiness, some people dispute it, but it's been across 60 different countries now. And it's pretty conclusive. It's also been shown in apes that there's a U-curve of happiness. And the basic research shows the following, that there's a long, slow decline from early adulthood till midlife. And then around midlife, because of something Brené Brown calls the midlife unraveling, you actually start to unravel all of the expectations you had of yourself and maybe how you wanted to live your life. And you start to consider an alternative way to curate your life in your 50s and beyond. And you care less about what other people think about you, etc. And so the book, Learning to Love Midlife, part of the reason I have 12 reasons why life gets better with age is because I think there are some specific reasons why people do get happier as they get older, on average. Again, these are all averages. Your mileage may vary. But you can just study, if you wanted to learn more about the U-curve of happiness, you can read about it on Wikipedia.
I have one last question, and this one just a short answer, and then we're going to launch it. We only have like 5 minutes left. Is this midlife crisis, this whole phase, is it global? Is it US oriented? Is it, and you traveled the world, and you've seen people from 47 countries. Is it universal?
It is more pronounced in cultures that have aging issues, meaning where ageism is more prevalent, partly because midlife is the doorway to older life. Once you get through midlife, you have older life. And if you're in this culture that doesn't respect or revere or appreciate older life, man, you don't want midlife, because that's the doorway that's going to take me to that place I don't want to go. And so it's more pronounced in places like that. It's more pronounced in places where disappointment equals expectations minus reality. That's an emotional equation. Where cultures where there's a lot of expectations on yourself, because it's around midlife that you actually start to see you're not living up to those expectations, and you get disappointed. And so I'd say Western culture is more affected by it. But there's places like Japan that are very affected by it in a way that it's around midlife that people realize they're working themselves to death. And they don't know how to get off that treadmill. So that's true in the US too, but even more pronounced in Japan. And so there are other forms of why a midlife crisis exists in other places in the world. But I think probably the US is the place where it's the worst, and it's the place where we make jokes about it. And we think about Kevin Spacey in American Beauty buying a red sports car and having an affair with his daughter's high school best friend. I mean, that's how we sort of look at midlife crisis, as it's a joke. And it's not a joke. I lost 5 male friends to midlife crisis, in 15 years ago. So I part of the reason I do what I do, and I am a midlife activist, is because of those 5 men.
Well, thank you, Chip. We are just a couple minutes left. I would actually describe you as a midlife rebel. You are the rebel, continuing on from your early life. So thank you so much for sharing such great insights. And for those of you who have not bought the book, remember, here we go. Let's get better. Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. And one of the things, if you buy this book, Chip refers to it as a midwife for midlife. So just think about that. We do have one more question for you all. Just put it into the chat. What is one gem you've picked up from our conversation today that you apply to your midlife journey? So think about that one. Is there anything that you heard today that's really resonated with you that you're thinking about? So please plop that into the chat. And I do want to remind you that we did record this. We will be sending this out next week, along with materials talking about our membership drive. Remember, it's a BOGO, buy one, get one free. And the first 75 people will get a copy of Chip's book. And for the people who attended today's event, Kelly and I will go through them all, toss the names into a hat of who attended today, and pull those 25 out. And we'll be sending you an email about how we'll be mailing that out to you. I'm seeing that people are saying growing whole. They think that's a great thing. This is very different. Instead of growing old, we should be growing whole. Collective effervescence. Awesome session. Thank you all. New aging perspectives. Life begins at 60. Okay, Terry, I'm with you. Age fluid. So there are a lot of different things that people are taking away. So and successism, that even shows up. So I do want to point to our upcoming event on March 20th. That will be at 12 noon Eastern time. And Kelly, if you could put up that little graphic, we'll just remind people that this is going to cover the many ways to be an encore entrepreneur. I mean, just think about it. We'll be talking about starting a business, buying a business. Maybe you're going to be thinking about being an independent contractor, joining the gig economy, or you're investing or going to be advising an early stage business. So I think Kelly is going to put a link in there for being a member, as well as a link for participating in the event on the 20th of March. I would just ask Jim and Chip. Jim, any final comments?
Only thank you, Chip, and thanks to all of you for your participation and great takeaways that you're putting into the chat.
And Kelly just put the program evaluation there too. Please take a minute to fill in the evaluation. That would be great. And Chip, anything you want to offer as a final takeaway in our last minute?
Well, just go out and be an activist in whatever form you want that to be. It could be activating for a community park near you, or global warming, or something related to the election this coming year, or this year. So just be an activist. It's good for you.
And I would say that my final words would be quoting Chip: break convention, break habits, break free, and enjoy your new midlife journey. So thank you all. We will see you in March. Thanks again, Chip.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.